From the frozen fords of the north, they came. Unannounced. Vikings, a name that sowed terror, rewriting the map of Europe in blood and steel. We think we know them. The horned helmets, the berserker rage, the warriors who lived only to destroy. But is that the whole truth? Behind centuries of myth and the fear they inspired lies an even greater mystery. How did a people from the fringes of the known world, relatively few in number, rampage across continents, challenge empires, and forge an undying legacy? Where did their extraordinary power truly come from? So, cast aside the familiar images. Join us as we dive deep into the eye of the storm to explore the astonishing technologies, the brutal yet sophisticated tactics, an ideology that made death a glorious pursuit, and an economy fueled by both the blade and the bargain. This isn't just history. This is the unraveling of the true power of the Vikings. Alright, before we really dive deep into the incredible arsenal of the Vikings, if you're feeling as excited about this journey of discovery as I am, please do me a quick favor and hit that like button for this video. And if you're not already part of our crew, make sure to hit subscribe and that little notification bell right next to it so you don't miss out on any of the secrets we're about to uncover. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up. We'll be decoding the legendary Ulfbert swords. Did they really come from distant lands? We'll explore the truth behind the fearsome berserker warriors and the secrets of the Longships that helped them dominate the seas. And there's so much more exciting stuff waiting just ahead. Oh, and by the way, I'm super curious, where in the world are you all tuning in from? And what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments below. It's always amazing to know we're exploring history together from all corners of the globe. Alright, now let's get right back to the swords and axes that forged the Viking name. Part 1. Introduction, the Viking phenomenon, warrior raider, and an A defining the Viking Age and its key protagonists. Let us cast our minds back to Europe at the close of the 8th century. It was a continent in quiet flux, a mosaic of fledgling kingdoms slowly taking shape, with the tendrils of Christian faith steadily unfurling across its diverse landscapes. Then, like a thunderclap from the frigid, oft misunderstood north, the established order was violently, irrevocably altered. The Viking Age, conventionally dated from the shocking, brutal assault on the Northumbrian monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD, an act that sent tremors of disbelief and horror rippling through the heart of Christendom to the pivotal era. Defining Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 was an epoch that didn't just arrive, it exploded onto the world stage. This was a period spanning nearly 3 centuries, a temporal canvas vast enough for these Norse seafarers to etch their name, their deeds, and their distinctive culture into the very bedrock of European, and indeed, world history. Their impact was not fleeting, it was foundational, reshaping political boundaries, economic systems, and cultural identities in ways that still resonate today. It is crucial to understand that Viking was not merely a label for a brief, violent outburst, but a descriptor of a sustained period of profound and widespread interaction, often aggressive, yet also frequently commercial and colonial. These interactions, as we shall see, fundamentally altered the trajectory of numerous societies they encountered. The repercussions of their voyages, raids, and settlements were felt from the eastern shores of North America to the riverways of Russia and the grand cities of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. Now, when the term Viking echoes in modern discourse, it often conjures a rather monolithic image, a unified nation, a homogeneous horde of blonde-haired, bearded warriors, perhaps adorned with those famously and erroneously horned helmets. But the reality, as is so often the case with history's grand narratives, is a tapestry woven with far more intricate, diverse, and ultimately, more captivating threads. The very word Viking, in its Old Norse origins Vikingur for the person, King for the expedition, did not, in its primary sense, denote a singular ethnicity or a fixed nationality as we conceive of them in the modern era. Rather, it more frequently described an activity, an occupation, a specific type of undertaking. To go a Viking Fara King was to embark on an overseas expedition. This expedition might be for plunder, for the acquisition of silver and slaves that fueled their burgeoning economies. It could be for trade, a more peaceful, yet no less adventurous, exchange of goods and ideas. Or it might be for exploration, driven by a thirst for knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon, or the desperate, pragmatic search for new lands to settle, to farm, to call home, as populations in their Scandinavian homelands grew and resources became more strained. The term was, in essence, a verb as much as it was a noun, a descriptor of a lifestyle choice or a seasonal enterprise for many, rather than a permanent ethnic label for all. These remarkable individuals, the adventurers, the warriors, the merchants, the settlers, hailed predominantly from the often harsh, unforgiving, yet strikingly beautiful coastal and fjord-riven landscapes of Scandinavia, the regions that would eventually coalesce into the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Their societies were intrinsically maritime, their lives and livelihoods deeply intertwined with the sea. The sea was their barrier, their provider, and, crucially, their highway to the wider world. However, it was perhaps this very inherent flexibility encapsulated in the professional designation of a Viking, as opposed to a rigid, unyielding ethnic or national identity, that endowed them with a unique operational advantage. This fluidity allowed for the mobilization of diverse, often ad hoc, groups for a vast array of expeditions. A war band setting out for a raid might be composed differently from a trading mission seeking luxury goods in the East. This adaptability, this capacity to tailor their forces and objectives to specific circumstances, was a crucial, if often underappreciated, element of their success. It contributed significantly to their dynamic, often unpredictable, and remarkably widespread impact on the medieval world, enabling them to respond to disparate opportunities and challenges with a versatility that frequently outmaneuvered and confounded their more geographically fixed and socially rigid contemporaries. They were, without a shadow of a doubt, the scourge of Europe's coastlines and navigable rivers. Their longships, those masterpieces of naval engineering with their iconic, fearsome dragon prows, seemed to materialize from the morning mists or the storm-tossed seas like spectral nightmares, bearing warriors who brought with them fire, steel, and a terrifying, almost preternatural reputation for battlefield ferocity. The anguished plea, "A furor Normanorum, libera nos Domine," from the fury of the Northmen, "O Lord, deliver us," a prayer, though its widespread historical use is debated, that perfectly encapsulates the dread they inspired, is said to have echoed in monasteries and churches across a traumatized continent. And yet, this is only one side of a complex, multifaceted coin. These same people, often the very same individuals, were also astute and pragmatic merchants, navigating treacherous waters and perilous overland routes to engage in sophisticated commerce. They were daring explorers who, driven by a potent blend of curiosity, ambition, and necessity, pushed the boundaries of the known European world further than any before them. They were resilient and resourceful settlers, capable of establishing new, enduring communities in some of the most challenging environments imaginable, from the volcanic landscapes of Iceland and the marginal farmlands of Greenland to, for a fleeting, tantalizing period, the shores of Vinland in North America. They wove together vast and intricate trading networks, arteries of commerce and cultural exchange, that stretched from the fir-rich forests of the north and the amber coasts of the Baltic, down the great river systems of Eastern Europe, to the opulent, cosmopolitan markets of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, Miklagard, the great city, as it loomed large in their sagas and imaginations, and even further, into the heart of the Islamic caliphates of the Middle East. They traded furs, walrus ivory, amber, and, tragically, slaves for silver dirhams, lustrous silks, exotic spices, and fine Frankish weaponry. This inherent duality, this capacity to be both the fearsome warrior and the canny trader, the brutal destroyer and the tenacious builder, is an absolutely essential and endlessly captivating component of the Viking phenomenon. It's a paradox that defies easy categorization and challenges us to look beyond simplistic labels. B. The central enigma explaining Viking military prowess. This brings us squarely to the core question, the central enigma that this entire investigation seeks to unravel. How, precisely, did they achieve all this? What were the multifaceted, interconnected origins of the Vikings' extraordinary, and often seemingly overwhelming, military prowess? What was the unique constellation of factors that enabled these relatively small, disparate groups from the northern fringes of Europe to project their power and influence so effectively? across such a vast geographical canvas, and for such a remarkably sustained period of nearly 3 centuries. How did these seafarers, these raiders, these traders, these settlers transform themselves from a regional nuisance into a force that reshaped the political, economic, and cultural map of an entire continent and beyond? The sheer scale and duration of their impact demand a comprehensive explanation. The popular imagination, often fueled by centuries of sagas, chronicles penned by their often terrified victims, and, more recently, by a plethora of dramatic, though not always historically accurate, fictional portrayals, frequently defaults to rather simplistic, one-dimensional caricatures. We see them as towering, axe-wielding berserkers, driven by an insatiable bloodlust, an almost inhuman ferocity, and a primitive, pagan savagery that set them apart from their more civilized, Christian contemporaries. But to halt our inquiry at this superficial level, to accept this sensationalized, often demonizing, stereotype, would be to miss the very essence, the underlying sophistication, the calculated ingenuity, and indeed, the profound complexity that underpinned their astonishing and enduring success. Their formidable strength was not born solely of raw courage, untamed ferocity, or a disregard for their own lives, though they undoubtedly possessed these attributes in abundance. No, their ascendancy was the result of a potent, almost alchemical, synergy, a near-perfect formula, if you will, for expansion, exploitation, and, eventually, integration. This formula was a complex amalgam. It included groundbreaking, environment-specific technological innovations, particularly in shipbuilding, which gave them their unparalleled maritime mobility, and in metallurgy and weapon smithing, which provided them with effective and reliable arms. It encompassed sophisticated and adaptable tactics, honed on both the unforgiving seas and the diverse battlefields of Europe, from swift coastal raids to pitched shield, wall engagements. It was rooted in unique social structures that systematically conditioned and trained warriors from a young age, instilling a martial ethos deep within their cultural fabric, making warfare an accepted, even expected, part of life for free men. It was animated and sustained by a compelling and pragmatic warrior ideology, a worldview that glorified honor, courage, and renown, that promised a glorious afterlife in Valhalla for those who fell bravely in battle, and that fostered a stoic acceptance of fate. And, crucially, it was underpinned and perpetually fueled by powerful, often inescapable, underlying economic drivers, the push factors of resource scarcity and demographic pressure in their Scandinavian homelands, and the pull factors of portable wealth, fertile lands, and lucrative trade opportunities available abroad. Furthermore, there is another critical layer to this intricate tapestry of Viking power, a dimension often overshadowed when our gaze is fixed solely upon their dramatic outward expeditions and conquests. The Viking Age was not merely an era of external expansion and aggressive outreach, it was, concurrently, a period of profound and transformative internal developments within Scandinavia itself. This was a time of significant political consolidation, where disparate petty chiefdoms were gradually being amalgamated, often through force and diplomacy, under the sway of more powerful regional leaders, and, eventually, emerging royal dynasties. The very foundations of early Scandinavian statehood were being laid, albeit unevenly and contentiously, during these centuries. And these internal dynamics were not, it must be stressed, separate from or incidental to their external activities. Rather, they were intrinsically linked, engaged in a constant, mutually reinforcing interplay. The lines between domestic politics and foreign adventurism were often blurred, if they existed at all in any meaningful sense. The pursuit of power and resources knew no strict geographical boundaries. Consider this scenario, one that likely played out countless times across the north: the silver plundered from a wealthy English monastery, or the profits gleaned from a perilous trading voyage down the Russian rivers to the Black Sea, could dramatically enhance the prestige, the wealth, and, consequently, the coercive power of a chieftain or a fledgling king back in his Norwegian fjord or Danish heartland. This newfound wealth could allow him to reward his loyal herd, his personal retinue of warriors, to forge new alliances, to fund the construction of larger and more formidable fleets, and to attract an ever-growing band of warriors to his banner, thereby consolidating his authority and decisively outmaneuvering his local rivals in the relentless, often brutal, Game of Scandinavian power politics. Conversely, the very processes of increasing political centralization and the fierce, often zero-sum, competition for dominance within Scandinavia could also have acted as powerful push factors, propelling certain groups outwards. Ambitious younger sons with limited prospects of inheriting land or titles under systems of primogeniture, defeated factions in internal power struggles facing exile or subjugation, or simply adventurous, restless individuals chafing under a newly asserted, and perhaps more demanding royal authority, all might have looked beyond their native shores for fortune, for land, for autonomy, or for a fresh opportunity to carve out their own domains and achieve the renown or styrard so highly prized in their culture. Therefore, the Viking phenomenon, viewed from this internal perspective, can also be understood as a dynamic, outward manifestation of a Scandinavian society in flux, a society grappling with significant demographic, economic, and political pressures. It was, in part, a restless, ambitious energy, a societal pressure cooker, seeking outlets, opportunities, and new arenas for advancement beyond the confines of their northern homelands. Their external reach was, in many ways, an extension of their internal ambitions, rivalries, and anxieties. See scope and structure of the report. So, to truly unravel this captivating historical enigma, to get to the very heart of what made the Vikings such a formidable and enduring force, we will embark on a systematic exploration. We will, in essence, dissect the Viking war machine, examining each critical component that contributed to their remarkable and often terrifying presence on the world stage. Our journey will begin where much of their martial reputation was forged with their arsenal. We will scrutinize the very tools of their trade, the swords, axes, spears, bows, and defensive gear that they wielded with such devastating effect. We will investigate not just the weapons themselves, but the technology and craftsmanship behind them. From there, we will take to the seas, exploring the art of Viking warfare on water and land. We will marvel at their revolutionary longships, the vessels that granted them unparalleled mobility and strategic reach, and then delve into their battlefield tactics, from the disciplined fury of the shield wall to the terrifying onslaught of the berserkers. Next, we will attempt to understand the Viking warrior's heart and mind. What were the core beliefs, the societal values, the driving motivations, the concepts of honor, renown, Valhalla, and fate that steeled them for conflict and shaped their approach to life and death? And finally, no understanding of Viking power would be complete without examining the economic sinews of their endeavors. We will briefly explore the intricate and often inseparable relationship between their raiding activities and their extensive trading networks, understanding how these economic pursuits funded, fueled, and were in turn shaped by their military might. This comprehensive, multi-faceted approach, we believe, is essential to move beyond myth and stereotype and to construct a richer, more nuanced understanding of one of history's most dynamic and impactful peoples. Our deep dive into the Viking world and the sources of their enduring power begins now with the very instruments of their conquests, the weapons that heralded their arrival and carved their indelible mark upon the ages. We've charted the vast expanse of the Viking Age, understood the multifaceted nature of the Viking phenomenon, and glimpsed the complex interplay of forces that propelled them onto the world stage. But to truly comprehend their military impact, we must now turn our attention to the very instruments of their power, the tangible extensions of their will and martial prowess. What were the tools of war that enabled these Norse seafarers to carve out such a formidable reputation? Let us now unsheathe the secrets of the Viking arsenal. Part 2. The Viking arsenal. Crafting the tools of war. A. The famed blades, swords and saxes. In the hierarchy of Viking weaponry, few items commanded as much prestige or symbolized status and martial identity as profoundly as the sword. More than just a tool for combat, it was a treasured heirloom, a mark of a warrior's wealth and social standing, often passed down through generations, carrying with it the mana and stories of its previous owners. These were not weapons for the common man. Their creation demanded significant resources, specialized skills, and considerable time. Consequently, their ownership was largely confined to the wealthier echelons of Viking society, the chieftains, the successful raiders, the members of a king's elite herd. The typical Viking Age sword was a formidable piece of engineering. generally double-edged, with a blade length averaging around 70-80 centimeters. Though some examples reached up to 90 cm, they were designed primarily for cutting and slashing, though capable of a thrust. The hilts, often intricately decorated, especially in the later Viking Age, showcased a vibrant artistic tradition featuring complex animal interlace patterns, geometric designs, and sometimes inlays of precious metals like silver, copper, and even gold. These embellishments were not mere frippery. They spoke volumes about the owner's taste, resources, and perhaps even their regional affiliations or loyalties. The pommel and guard, often substantial, provided a counterweight to the blade, ensuring the sword was well balanced and responsive in the hand. Archaeological finds from grave sites across Scandinavia and Viking settlements abroad have yielded a stunning array of these weapons, each telling a silent story of its time. We see an evolution in hilt styles, meticulously categorized by scholars like Jan Peterson, reflecting changing fashions and perhaps even subtle shifts in combat techniques over the centuries. Early swords might feature simpler, more robust hilts, while later examples often display more elaborate and ornate craftsmanship, a testament to the increasing wealth and sophisticated tastes of the Viking elite. The blades themselves were often marvels of metallurgy, frequently constructed using a technique known as pattern welding. This involved forging together multiple strips of iron with varying carbon contents, twisting and hammering them to create a blade that was both strong and flexible, with a hard cutting edge. The resulting rippling, watered, silk patterns on the blade's surface were not just beautiful, they were a visible hallmark of superior craftsmanship. But then, there was a class of sword that transcended even these high standards. A name whispered with awe, and perhaps a touch of legend, the Ulfbert. These were not just fine weapons, they represented the absolute zenith of Viking Age sword-making technology, a quantum leap in metallurgical understanding for their time in Europe. What set the Ulfbert swords apart was the extraordinary quality of their blades, forged from crucible steel. This steel, with a significantly higher and more uniformly distributed carbon content than most contemporary European blades, possessed a remarkable combination of properties: exceptional strength, an edge that could be honed to razor sharpness and retain it longer, and a greater degree of flexibility, making it less prone to shattering upon impact. Furthermore, these blades were often lighter than their pattern, welded counterparts of similar size, allowing for quicker, more agile handling in the fast-paced chaos of battle. To wield an Ulfbert was to possess a tangible combat advantage. The enigmatic inscription, VLFBRHVT, see in its various spellings and iterations, often flanked by one or more crosses, found meticulously inlaid into the blades, has been the subject of intense scholarly debate for generations. Is it the personal name of a Frankish mastersmith, or perhaps the trademark of a renowned workshop, or even a series of workshops operating over a considerable period? The prevailing theory suggests a Frankish, specifically Rhineland, origin for these superior blades, or at least the technological know-how. The presence of a cross, or multiple crosses, within the inscription has fueled further speculation. Did it indicate some form of involvement by monastic orders or ecclesiastical workshops, which were known centers of learning and craft in the Carolingian Empire? While an intriguing possibility, definitive proof remains elusive. However, what is undeniably astonishing is the sheer number of these Ulfbert swords. Over 170 have been found to date, discovered not primarily in their supposed Frankish heartland, but overwhelmingly in Scandinavia and in areas across Europe subject to Viking activity and influence. This distribution pattern is particularly striking given that the Carolingian rulers, aware of the military threat posed by the Vikings, had imposed strict prohibitions on the export of weaponry to their northern neighbors. So, how did these technologically superior and presumably highly coveted blades find their way into Norse hands in such quantities? The answer likely lies in a combination of factors. Legitimate trade, perhaps conducted discreetly or through loopholes in the embargoes, may account for some. Others were undoubtedly acquired as spoils of war, prized trophies taken from defeated Frankish warriors or looted from wealthy settlements. And some may have been received as part of ransom payments or tribute, a tangible price paid for peace by those who feared the Viking onslaught. The Vikings, ever pragmatic, would have recognized the superior quality of these weapons and actively sought them out through whatever means necessary. The advanced crucible steel technology evident in the Ulfbert swords was not widespread in Europe at that time. Intriguingly, similar steel making techniques were known and practiced in Central Asia and the Middle East. This has led to compelling, though still debated, theories that the raw steel ingots, or perhaps even the technological knowledge itself, might have been imported into the Rhineland via the extensive Viking trade routes, particularly the Volga trade route that connected Scandinavia with Persia, the Abbasid Caliphate, and regions further east. If true, this would represent a fascinating intersection. The Vikings, through their far-reaching commercial networks, may have inadvertently facilitated the transfer of a critical military technology from the east to the west, which was then refined by Frankish smiths and subsequently acquired by the Vikings themselves, enhancing their own martial capabilities. This underscores a vital theme: the interconnectedness of Viking economic reach and their access to superior military hardware, a clear example of how their trading acumen could directly bolster their warrior strength. Alongside the prestigious sword, almost every free Viking man, and many women, would have carried a seax, also known as a scramasax. This was a large, single-edged knife or short sword, a truly versatile implement serving as both a practical utility tool for everyday tasks, from cutting food and wood to mending gear, and as a readily available sidearm for close quarters combat, or as a weapon of last resort if their primary weapon was lost or broken. Its design was characteristically straightforward. A tanga projection from the blade running along the blade's center line was inserted into an organic hilt, typically made of wood, bone, or horn. Saxes were designed to be worn horizontally at the belt, usually with the cutting edge facing upwards, allowing for a quick, efficient draw. They varied considerably in size and form, from short, almost dagger-like versions, to much longer, sword-length implements. A particularly distinctive type, common in England and Ireland, and also found in Viking contexts, is the broken-back seax, characterized by a sharp, angular break along the spine of the blade towards the point. This design may have offered advantages in certain types of thrusting or cutting actions. Some seaxes, particularly the larger and more prestigious examples, featured pattern, welded blades similar to swords, or were adorned with inlaid decorations, indicating that even this utilitarian weapon could be an object of pride and status. The seax, then, was the ubiquitous companion of the Viking, a testament to their practical mindset, always prepared for both the demands of daily life and the sudden eruption of violence. B. The mighty axe, icon and implement. If the sword was the aristocrat of the Viking arsenal, then the axe, in its various forms, was arguably its most iconic and democratic representative. While swords were costly and relatively rare, axes were far more widespread, found in the hands of warriors from all strata of society. This was partly due to their lower production cost and their inherent versatility. An axe could fell a tree in the morning, split firewood in the afternoon, and cleave an enemy's shields or skull in the evening. It was the quintessential Viking tool, equally at home in peace and war. The most visually striking and perhaps most feared of these was the Dane axe, also known as the long axe or breakaxe broad axe. This was no woodsman's chopper. It was a dedicated two-handed weapon of war, a truly terrifying implement in the hands of a skilled Viking warrior. It featured a long wooden haft, typically ranging from 0.9 to 1.2 meters, 3 to 4 feet, for combat versions, although some ceremonial or status symbol versions could be even longer, reaching up to 1.7 meters. Atop this haft sat a broad, surprisingly thin axe head, often with a gracefully curved or flared cutting edge. The design of the Dane axe head, frequently characterized by distinct horns or points at the toe, upper point, and heels, lower point of the blade, Peterson's typology L and M types are common examples, was optimized for delivering devastating, shearing blows. These horns could catch on shield edges or limbs, adding to its effectiveness. The thinness of the blade, often featuring a high carbon steel cutting edge expertly forged, welded to a softer, more shock-absorbent iron body, made it remarkably light and deceptively fast for its size. This wasn't a clumsy, brute force weapon. It required skill and timing to wield effectively, but in the right hands, its reach and power were immense. It could deliver cleaving blows with enough force to split shields, shatter helmets, and inflict horrific injuries. Against unarmored or lightly armored opponents, it was devastating. The historical record and artistic depictions attest to the Dane axe's fearsome reputation. It is famously portrayed in the Bayeux tapestry, wielded with deadly effect by the Anglo-Saxon huscarls, many of whom were of Danish descent and retained Viking fighting styles, against the Norman knights at the Battle of Hastings. Accounts also describe its effectiveness in breaking through shield walls and even in felling horses, a crucial tactic against mounted opponents. Furthermore, the Dane axe became a characteristic weapon of the elite Varangian Guard, the formidable mercenary force, largely composed of Norsemen and later Anglo-Saxons, who served as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople. The image of these towering Northmen, clad in gleaming armor and wielding their great axes, struck awe and fear into the hearts of those who beheld them in the streets and palaces of the Eastern Roman Empire. While the Great Dane axe was the showstopper, smaller, one-handed axes were far more common and arguably more versatile for the average Viking. Many of these featured a distinctive bearded design, skegex beard axe, where the lower portion of the axe blade extended downwards below the butt of the head, creating a beard. This beard was not merely decorative, it served a practical purpose in combat. It increased the length of the cutting edge without significantly adding to the weight, and the hook-like shape of the beard could be used to pull away an opponent's shield, unbalance them, or hook their limbs in the close quarters press of a shield wall. These axes were true multi-tools, serving as effective weapons in their own right, capable of delivering swift, vicious blows, and also as indispensable implements for shipbuilding, construction, and everyday camp chores. Their ubiquity speaks to the pragmatic nature of Viking society, where the line between tool and weapon was often blurred. Given their lower production cost, simpler construction compared to swords, and their inherent utility, axes were much more widely distributed throughout Viking society. While a finely crafted sword was a mark of significant wealth and status, a sturdy axe was a near-universal possession for a free man. This ensured that even the most modestly equipped Viking raider or farmer called to the Lydings the levy was a dangerous opponent, armed with a weapon he knew intimately from daily use. The sagas are replete with tales of heroes and ordinary folk alike wielding axes with skill and deadly effect, further cementing the axe's place as a quintessential symbol of the Viking warrior. See, reaching further, spears and bows. While swords and axes often capture the popular imagination with their visceral, close, quarters lethality, the most ubiquitous weapon on any Viking Age battlefield, the true workhorse of their armies, was likely the humble yet highly effective spear. Its prevalence stemmed from its relative simplicity of construction, lower cost compared to swords, and its versatility in both offensive and defensive roles. For many warriors, particularly those of lesser means or those fulfilling their levy obligations, the spear would have been their primary weapon. The typical Viking spear consisted of a wooden shaft, commonly made from ash or birch woods known for their strength and resilience, usually measuring around 2 to 3 meters, 6.5 to 10 feet in length. This length provided good reach in combat, allowing a warrior to engage an enemy from a safer distance or to strike from behind the protection of a shield wall. Affixed to this shaft was an iron spearhead. These heads varied considerably in design, reflecting different manufacturing traditions, intended uses, and periods within the Viking Age. Peterson's typology again provides a useful framework here. Early spearheads were often simple, elegant leaf-shaped forms, Peterson types AE, prevalent until around 950 AD. Later periods saw the emergence of more angular, sometimes barbed, designs with shorter or longer sockets for hafting, Peterson types D. Mammoth. Some spearheads featured wings or lugs just below the blade. These wings had a practical purpose. They helped to prevent the spear from penetrating too deeply into an enemy's body or shield, making it easier to withdraw quickly for a subsequent attack and preventing the opponent from easily grabbing the spear shaft. The spear was primarily a thrusting weapon, designed for delivering powerful, piercing blows in close combat. It was often wielded with 2 hands to maximize force, especially when attempting to punch through armor or a well-braced shield. However, Lighter versions, often referred to as javelins or throwing spears, geflak, skjot, were also an important part of the Viking arsenal. These could be hurled at enemy formations at the start of an engagement to disrupt their lines, harass their warriors, or pick off specific targets before the main clash of arms. The sagas contain numerous accounts of heroes and warriors skillfully employing both thrusting and throwing spears. Beyond the battlefield, the spear was also a vital tool for hunting large game such as boar or deer, sometimes used in conjunction with pit traps, further underscoring its utility in Viking society. Its role in forming the bristling front of a shield wall, presenting a near impenetrable hedge of sharp iron points to an advancing enemy, was absolutely critical to Viking infantry tactics. While close combat prowess was paramount, the Vikings also understood the value of ranged warfare, employing the bow and arrow for both hunting and in battle. Archery played a significant, if sometimes underappreciated, role in their military endeavors. Bows were typically used in the opening phases of land battles to harass and disorganize enemy formations before the lines met, to soften up defenses, or to provide covering fire. In naval engagements, archers were crucial for sweeping the decks of enemy ships with hails of arrows before boarding actions commenced, or for picking off steersmen and key warriors. The predominant type of bow used by the Vikings was the longbow, a self-bow typically crafted from a single stave of wood. Yew was highly prized for its excellent combination of strength and elasticity, making it the ideal bow wood, though ash and elm were also commonly used. These bows were often substantial, ranging from 1.6 to 2 meters, roughly 5 to 6.5 feet in length. A remarkable nearly complete yew longbow discovered at the Viking trading emporium of Hedeby, dating to the 9th or 10th century, measured an impressive 992 cms, over 6 feet in length, testament to the powerful bows these warriors could wield. The draw weights of such bows could be considerable, perhaps around 90 pounds, 40 kgf, or even more for a skilled archer, capable of launching an arrow with significant force and accuracy. Arrowheads were fashioned from iron and came in a variety of shapes, each suited for different purposes: broadheads for hunting or against unarmored targets, bodkin points for piercing mail or light armor. These heads were tanged, designed to be inserted into wooden arrow shafts, likely made from durable hardwoods, and fletched with feathers for stability in flight. Shafts typically measured around 70–80 cm. The effective range of a Viking longbow might have been around 200 meters, though skilled archers could potentially achieve greater distances, especially for harassing fire rather than precise targeting. While the longbow was their mainstay, there is some speculative, though not conclusive, archaeological and linguistic evidence of the term hornbogey suggesting a limited knowledge and perhaps occasional use of composite recurve bows. If such bows were used, they may have been acquired through contact with Eastern European or Asiatic cultures, where composite bow technology was more advanced, again hinting at the Vikings' capacity to adopt and adapt useful technologies from afar. Armor and protection withstanding the blows, an effective offense is crucial, but survival on the brutal Viking Age battlefield often depended just as much on the quality of a warrior's protection. While the image of the unarmored, berserk, raging Viking is popular, the reality is that those who could afford it sought to protect themselves with practical and increasingly sophisticated armor. Let's begin with the head, the most vital target. The iconic image of Vikings sporting helmets adorned with horns is, it must be stated unequivocally, a complete fabrication, a romantic invention of the 19th century, largely popularized by costume designers for Wagnerian operas. There is absolutely no archaeological or contemporary historical evidence for Viking warriors wearing horned helmets in battle. Such adornments would have been a severe encumbrance, easily caught by weapons or obstacles, and tactically nonsensical. While some pre-Viking or ceremonial headgear from the Germanic Iron Age or Bronze Age might have featured horns or animalistic motifs, such as the golden horns of Galahus or figures on the Osberg tapestry, these were not standard battlefield equipment for the Viking warrior. The actual combat helmets of the Viking Age were far more pragmatic and functional. They were typically of Spangenhelm construction, made from multiple metal plates riveted to a framey or simpler, conical or rounded skullcap designs forged from iron. By far the most significant and, to date, The only complete Viking Age helmet ever discovered is the magnificent Germanbu helmet, unearthed from a wealthy 10th century chieftain's grave in Norway. This remarkable find provides invaluable insight. It is a rounded cap made of 4 iron plates, featuring a distinctive spectacle, guard that protected the eyes and nose, somewhat resembling a pair of glasses. It likely also had a male aventail or curtain, a hringserker, attached to protect the neck and throat, though the mail itself did not survive intact with the helmet. The Germanbu helmet is a testament to practical, effective design, offering solid protection without unduly restricting vision or movement. While iron helmets like the Germanbu offered the best protection, they would have been relatively expensive and thus not available to all. It is highly probable that many warriors, especially those of lesser means, wore helmets made of hardened leather, possibly Rajal Mar, possibly reinforced with metal strips or studs. These would have been cheaper and easier to produce, offering a reasonable degree of protection against glancing blows, though they rarely survive in the archaeological record due to their organic nature. The sagas occasionally mention warriors whose helmets are split, implying the existence of less robust headgear than solid iron. For body armor, the most effective, and consequently most prized, form of protection was the mail shirt, known in Old Norse as a brynja. This was a formidable defense against cutting and slashing weapons. A typical Viking Age mail shirt was constructed from thousands of tiny, interlinked iron rings. The most common pattern was the 4-in-1, where each individual ring was linked through 4 others. Crafting such a garment was an incredibly laborious and time-consuming process. Each ring, often made from drawn iron wire, had to be formed, its ends overlapped, and then meticulously riveted shut to ensure its strength. A full mail shirt could contain anywhere from 20 to 30 zalas in such rings and weigh a considerable amount, perhaps 10-15 kg or 22-33 lubis. Consequently, mail armor was extremely expensive, a luxury item restricted to chieftains, wealthy warriors, professional members of a king's or jarl's herd, and perhaps successful raiders who had accumulated significant plunder. It was a clear indicator of high status and martial success. A mail shirt would typically have been tunic length, reaching to the mid, thigh or knee, often with short sleeves, though some depictions suggest longer sleeves, or even male leggings ed brynhoserd and coifs, hringserkered, for more complete protection in later periods. It is highly probable that a male brynja was worn over a padded undergarment, known as a gambesson or Ekutenspanzer or Vikpentreja in Old Norse. This padded layer, made of quilted fabric or leather, served several crucial functions. It cushioned the shock of blows, preventing blunt force trauma that mail alone could not stop. It provided some protection against direct thrusts from spears or arrows that might otherwise part the rings, and it made the wearing of the heavy, abrasive mail more comfortable. Mail itself, while excellent against cuts, offered less defense against concussive force or determined piercing attacks without such padding. The most ubiquitous and essential piece of defensive equipment for nearly every Viking warrior, from the wealthiest jarl to the humblest freeman, was the shield scaleoger. Indeed, in some Scandinavian legal codes, members of a ship's crew were required by law to possess one. The predominant type throughout most of the Viking Age was the round shield, typically measuring between 80 to 90 centimeters, ells around 32-36 inches in diameter. These shields were constructed from wooden planks, often of lighter, softer woods like fir, pine, or spruce, and sometimes linden, which were less prone to splitting than hardwoods. These planks were glued together to increase their durability and prevent them from splitting under the impact of blows. The wooden core was often covered with stretched animal hides, rawhide or leather, on one or both faces, and the rim might be further reinforced with leather or iron banding. At the center of the round shield was a prominent, dome-shaped iron umbo or shield boss. This boss protected the warrior's hand, which gripped a single horizontal wooden bar located directly behind it. This central grip design was crucial. It made the shield highly maneuverable and dynamic. It wasn't just a passive barrier. It could be used actively to deflect blows, to bind or trap an opponent's weapon, and even offensively, to punch or bash an enemy with the heavy iron boss or the shield's edge. Viking shields were often brightly painted with bold geometric patterns, zoomorphic designs, or personal symbols. These decorations could signify allegiance to a particular leader or region, serve as personal identifiers on a chaotic battlefield, or simply have a psychological impact on the enemy. The relatively light weight of these shields, compared to later medieval heater shields, allowed for considerable agility and endurance in prolonged combat. The famed Viking shield wall, Skjaldborg, relied entirely on the effective use of these interlocking round shields to create a formidable, almost impenetrable defensive barrier against infantry and cavalry alike. Examples of such shields, remarkably preserved, have been found in ship burials like Gokstad and Osberg. Towards the later part of the Viking Age, roughly from the 10th to 11th centuries, a new type of shield began to appear in Viking contexts, particularly among those who had extensive contact with continental Europe, the kite shield. This shield, as its name suggests, was elongated and tapered towards the bottom, resembling an inverted teardrop or a kite. This design offered better protection for the legs, a feature particularly advantageous for mounted warriors, although cavalry was never a primary component of traditional Viking warfare in Scandinavia itself. The adoption of the kite shield likely reflects an awareness of an adaptation to evolving military technologies and tactics on the European mainland. The Bayeux tapestry famously depicts Norman knights, who were themselves of Viking descent, equipped with kite shields during their conquest of England in 1066. This later adoption again highlights the Vikings' pragmatic willingness to incorporate effective foreign military innovations when they saw their utility. Concluding thoughts on the arsenal. The Viking arsenal, therefore, reveals a fascinating blend of pragmatism, skilled craftsmanship, and a keen eye for effective, battle-proven design. From the readily available and versatile axes and spears that armed the common warrior, to the resource-intensive, technologically advanced Ulfbert swords and mail byrnies that distinguished the elite, their weaponry reflected a tiered system. This system ensured broad armament across their fighting forces while concentrating superior technological advantages, and thus enhanced lethality and survivability among their leadership and core warrior groups. Crucially, the evidence, particularly concerning the Ulfbert swords with their probable Frankish origins and potential Eastern technological links, demonstrates that Viking military might was not entirely self-sufficient. It depended, in part, on their remarkable ability to acquire, whether through trade, plunder, or other means, superior foreign technology and material, highlighting a critical intersection between their economic activities and their military capabilities. Nor was their toolkit static. The later adoption of the kite shield, for instance, indicates an awareness of, and a willingness to adapt to, changing battlefield conditions and perhaps the military practices of their adversaries or allies on the continent. This adaptability was a hallmark of their enduring success, and it is essential to sweep away the persistent, romanticized myth of the horned helmet. The stark contrast between this popular fiction and the practical, functional design of actual Viking helmets like the Germanbu underscores how easily popular imagination can obscure archaeological reality, and it highlights the paramount importance of material evidence in accurately reconstructing the true panoply of the Viking warrior. With these tools of war in hand, forged with skill and imbued with purpose, how then did the Vikings deploy them? How did they organize themselves for battle, and what strategies and tactics did they employ on the tumultuous seas and the blood-soaked fields of medieval Europe? That is the art of war we shall explore next. All right, let us now plunge into the heart of Viking martial practice. Having examined the formidable tools they wielded, we now turn to the very art of their warfare, how these Northmen, armed with axe, sword, spear, and shield, prosecuted their conflicts on the unforgiving seas and the blood-soaked battlefields of medieval Europe. Their methods were often brutal, yet frequently displayed a cunning, adaptability, and strategic coherence that confounded their contemporaries and laid the foundation for their enduring military legacy. Part 3. The Viking Art of War. Tactics on land and the sea was the Vikings' first and truest dominion. It was their highway, their refuge, their hunting ground, and the springboard for their ambitions. And the key that unlocked this maritime mastery, the very bedrock upon which their far-reaching power was built, was their unparalleled vessel, the Longship. These were not mere boats, they were technological marvels of their age, perfectly attuned to the dual demands of treacherous open ocean voyages and swift, stealthy riverine incursions. Their very design was a weapon. Imagine the scene: a dawn mist clinging to the coastline, and then, emerging silently, their sleek, shallow draft holes allowing them to appear almost out of nowhere. Come the dragon, proud longships. Vessels like the famed Ski, the Snekja, or the even more fearsome Drakkar, dragon ship, along with their workhorse cargo counterparts, the broader, deeper, Hold Nar, were the products of centuries of accumulated shipbuilding knowledge. The Oseberg and Gokstad ships, those miraculously preserved treasures pulled from Norwegian burial mounds, stand as breathtaking testaments to this nautical genius. Their clinker-built hulls, where overlapping oak or pine planks were meticulously riveted together, created a structure that was both immensely strong and remarkably flexible. This flexibility was crucial, allowing the ship to work with the waves of the tumultuous North Atlantic, to bend and twist rather than break under stress, giving them an almost organic resilience. One of the Longship's most decisive tactical advantages was its remarkably shallow draft. This seemingly simple feature had profound strategic implications. It meant these vessels could navigate in coastal waters far too shallow for the deeper, drafted warships of other European powers. They could sail up rivers, penetrating deep into the continental interior, striking at settlements and monasteries that had long considered themselves safe from seaborne attack. This capability was the cornerstone of their signature hit and run raiding strategy. The element of surprise, amplified by their speed and unexpected avenues of approach, was a weapon in itself. Their long, narrow, and symmetrical design, with an almost identical bow and stern, contributed to their speed and maneuverability. This symmetry allowed for rapid changes in direction without the need for a cumbersome turning circle, essential for quick getaways after a raid or for tactical repositioning in a naval skirmish. Powering these vessels was a sophisticated dual propulsion system. A large, square sail, typically woven from wool and often waterproofed with animal fats, provided the primary means of propulsion for long sea voyages, capable of harnessing the winds to achieve impressive speeds. When the winds failed, or when navigating confined waterways or engaging in close quarters combat, the ships relied on oar power. Banks of oarsmen, their rhythmic strokes driving the vessel forward with precision and control, gave the longship a tactical responsiveness that sail alone could not provide. The mast itself could often be lowered, reducing the ship's profile and aiding in stealthy approaches or improving stability in rough weather. The Nar, while broader and deeper to accommodate cargo, settlers, and livestock for the arduous colonizing voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, still retained much of the longship's seaworthiness, a testament to the underlying excellence of Norse naval architecture. This mastery of maritime technology directly translated into devastatingly effective raiding tactics. The longship was the quintessential raiding platform. Speed and surprise were paramount. Viking war bands could appear suddenly off an unsuspecting coastline or far up a river, their shallow draft vessels allowing them to beach almost anywhere. Warriors could disembark rapidly, execute their lightning raid, often targeting wealthy but poorly defended monasteries or coastal trading settlements, seize plunder and captives, and then re-embark and vanish back into the vastness of the sea or the labyrinth of waterways before any significant local defense could be mustered. This ability to strike with impunity, to choose the time and place of engagement, and to melt away before retribution could arrive, was a source of immense frustration and terror for their victims. While land-based raids were their hallmark, the Vikings did not shy away from naval combat when circumstances demanded or opportunity arose. Their approach to sea battles was often brutally pragmatic. A common tactic involved lashing their ships together, side by side, to create large, stable floating platforms. This effectively transformed a naval engagement into a land battle fought on water, a scenario where their renowned prowess in close quarters, hand-to-hand combat could be brought to bear. Maneuvering to gain a favorable position, perhaps to windward or to isolate enemy vessels, was crucial. As the fleets closed, a barrage of missiles, arrows from their longbows, throwing spears, even stones, would be exchanged to soften up the enemy and clear their decks. Then, with grappling hooks thrown and hulls grinding together, the Vikings would launch ferocious boarding actions. The goal was typically not to sink enemy vessels, as ships themselves were valuable assets, but to overwhelm the crew, seize the ship and its cargo, and capture or kill its occupants. Smaller, more agile boats might have been used to harry the flanks of an enemy fleet or to dispatch those who fell overboard. The Viking longship was more than a means of transport. It was an integrated weapons system, its design and the tactics employed with it forming the very foundation of their expansive power. When forced to engage in pitched battles on land, the Vikings were far from an undisciplined mob. They possessed a repertoire of battlefield formations and tactics, chief among them the formidable Skjaldborg, or shield wall. This was the tactical linchpin of Viking infantry warfare, a disciplined formation that, while sharing conceptual similarities with other early medieval shield walls, was executed with a particular Viking ferocity and adapted to their specific weaponry. Imagine a solid phalanx of warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder, their large, round shields interlocked or overlapping to create an almost impenetrable barrier of wood, leather, and iron. The front rank would typically hold their shields high, perhaps at eye level, forming a solid rampart, while subsequent ranks might raise their shields to provide protection against incoming missiles. The depth of the shield wall, often several ranks deep, contributed significantly to its resilience and its ability to absorb the shock of an enemy charge. The Skjaldborg served a dual purpose. Defensively, it was exceptionally effective at repelling enemy attacks. Whether from infantry or cavalry, horses were notoriously reluctant to charge a solid wall of shields and projecting spear points. It could absorb hails of arrows and javelins, the tightly packed shields offering collective protection. Offensively, the shield wall could also advance as a disciplined unit, a grinding, inexorable mass, pushing back the enemy line and allowing individual warriors to fight from a position of relative security, striking out with spear, sword, or axe from behind the bulwark of their shields. The psychological impact of facing such a disciplined, unyielding formation, often accompanied by guttural war cries and the rhythmic beating of weapons on shields, must have been immense. However, the shield wall was not without its vulnerabilities. Its very solidity made it relatively ponderous and lacking in maneuverability. It was susceptible to flanking attacks or attacks from the rear if its flanks were not anchored by favorable terrain, such as a hill, a river, or dense woodland. Prolonged engagement in a shield wall was also physically exhausting for the warriors, particularly those in the front ranks bearing the brunt of the pressure. A determined, concentrated assault on a specific point in the wall, or the clever use of disruptive tactics like fire, could potentially breach it. Consequently, Viking commanders often sought to choose their battleground carefully, utilizing the landscape to protect their flanks and funnel the enemy into their killing zone. While the Skjaldborg was primarily a defensive or grinding offensive formation, the Vikings also employed more aggressive, specialized formations designed to break enemy lines. One such tactic, mentioned in the sagas, was the Svinfylking, or boar's snout, a wedge-shaped or triangular attacking formation. This deep column, with its apex formed by the best, equipped and most courageous warriors, was designed to punch through an enemy shield wall or battle line at a specific point, creating a breach that could then be exploited by following warriors. The heavily armed warriors at the point and along the leading edges of the wedge would absorb the initial impact, their momentum and concentrated force intended to shatter the enemy's cohesion. Lighter, armed warriors or archers might have been positioned within or behind the wedge for protection and support. The Svinfylking was a high-risk, high-reward tactic, effective for focused assaults, but vulnerable if its flanks were exposed, or if its momentum was blunted before it could achieve a breakthrough. The very existence of such specialized formations indicates a sophisticated tactical understanding that went beyond simple defensive lines, demonstrating an ability to plan and execute complex battlefield maneuvers. While disciplined formation fighting was crucial for success in larger engagements, Viking society, with its emphasis on individual honor and martial skill, also placed a high premium on personal combat prowess. This was famously exemplified in the institution of the holmgang, a ritualized duel fought to settle disputes of honor, property, or law. These duels, often fought on a marked-out hide or in a designated, confined area, followed strict rules and were serious, often lethal, affairs. The skills honed in such one-on-one encounters, mastery of sword, axe, and shield in dynamic, unpredictable combat, undoubtedly translated into greater effectiveness for the individual warrior within the larger formations of a shield wall or a raiding party. A warrior confident in his personal abilities was a more formidable component of the collective. And then there were the berserkers. Looming large in sagas and whispered in fearful chronicles, the berserkir, bear, shirts, and their lupine counterparts, the Tilla-Fey Nars, wolf, hides, were warriors said to fight in a state of ecstatic, animalistic fury. Descriptions portray them biting their shield rims, howling like beasts, seemingly impervious to pain, and possessed of superhuman strength. They often fought unarmored, or clad only in the skins of bears or wolves, their terrifying visage and behavior as much a weapon as their physical prowess. The exact nature of the berserker gang, or berserker rage, remains a subject of intense debate. Were they members of specific warrior cults, perhaps dedicated to Odin, inducing their trance, like state through ritualistic practices, chanting, and pre-battle frenzies? Or was their fury fueled by the ingestion of psychotropic substances, such as hallucinogenic mushrooms like Amanita muscaria, or potent brews containing bog myrtle or henbanes, seeds of which were found in a Viking grave at Furkat? Or could these states be explained by certain psychological conditions, perhaps a form of combat-induced PTSD or other dissociative states? Archaeological evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The Torslanda plates from Vendel, period Sweden, depict warriors in animalistic headdresses, and figures on the Lewis chessmen appear to be biting their shields. Regardless of its precise origin, the tactical role of the berserker was likely more psychological than numerical. They were probably not a standard military unit, but rather individuals or small, elite groups whose terrifying, seemingly uncontrollable rage could have a devastating impact on enemy morale. The sight of a berserker, foaming at the mouth, roaring, and shrugging off wounds that would fell an ordinary man, could be enough to break the nerve of even seasoned opponents, potentially shattering the cohesion of an enemy line. The sagas sometimes portray them as champions or elite shock troops, fighting at the forefront of battle. Later, however, their image became more ambiguous, sometimes depicted as unruly brawlers and outlaws, and indeed, laws were eventually passed in Iceland and Norway in the 11th and 12th centuries to prescribe berserker behavior. Whether ritual, drug-induced, or psychological, the berserker phenomenon added another layer of terror to the Viking military reputation, a force multiplier that transcended mere numbers. Beyond the shock value of the berserker, the Vikings consciously cultivated an aura of terror, employing psychological warfare as a deliberate instrument of their expansion. Their reputation for ruthlessness and ferocity often preceded them, sound by the vivid, horrified accounts of their victims, and amplified by their own actions. The sheer brutality of some of their raids, the targeting of sacred and seemingly inviolable sites like monasteries, and their pagan otherness, in the eyes of Christian Europe, all contributed to this image. Chronicles like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle or Alcuin of York's letters lamenting the destruction of Lindisfarne paint a chilling picture of the fear and devastation they wrought. They were often described not as mere men, but as heathen fiends, or wolves among sheep. This cultivated reputation for terror was not without its tactical advantages. It could demoralize opponents before a battle was even joined, leading to swifter surrenders, the abandonment of settlements, or, significantly, the payment of vast sums of danegeld, tribute paid by terrified kingdoms to buy off Viking armies and avert conflict. The very suddenness of their appearance, delivered by their swift longships, often from unexpected directions, amplified this fear. The threat of Viking violence became a potent coercive tool, allowing them to extort wealth and concessions without always needing to fight. This strategy, while seemingly a pragmatic way for beleaguered kingdoms to achieve temporary peace, inadvertently fueled the Viking war machine, providing the very resources needed to fund larger and more ambitious expeditions in the future, creating a vicious cycle of threat, payment, and renewed, stronger threat. The art of Viking warfare, then, was a complex tapestry woven from superior maritime technology, pragmatic and adaptable naval and land tactics, the disciplined fury of the shield wall, the terrifying shock of the berserker, and the calculated cultivation of a fearsome reputation. It was a system that allowed them to project power far beyond their numerical strength, making them one of the most formidable and transformative military forces of their age. Their longships were not just vessels, but strategic enablers, their shield walls not just defensive formations, but expressions of collective will, and their reputation, a weapon as sharp as any axe. Having explored the Vikings' formidable arsenal and their sophisticated art of war, we now venture into a realm perhaps less tangible, but no less crucial to their success, the warrior's very heart and mind. What beliefs, what ethics, what profound motivations burned within the Viking spirit, compelling them to face unimaginable perils, to embrace the clang of steel, and to carve their sagas into the annals of time. This is an exploration of the powerful ideologies that forged the Viking warrior. Part 4. The Viking warrior's heart. Ethos and motivation, the gleam of a well-honed blade, the unyielding line of a shield wall, the strategic genius of a sea-born raid, these are the outward manifestations of Viking martial prowess. But what of the inner landscape? What convictions resided in the soul of the Norse warrior, transforming him from a mere combatant into a force that often seemed to defy the very fear of death itself? To truly understand the Viking phenomenon, we must look beyond the physical, into the powerful currents of their ethical framework and the compelling tapestry of their beliefs. A. The pursuit of honor and undying fame, a timeless legacy. At the very core of the Viking warrior ethos lay a profound and all-encompassing concept of honor, known in Old Norse as drengskap. This was far more than simple battlefield bravery. It was a complex code of conduct, a measure of a man's worth, his integrity, and his standing within the community. Drengskaper encompassed a constellation of virtues, courage in the face of adversity, certainly, but also generosity to one's followers and kin, magnanimity towards a worthy foe, a keen sense of fair play, at least amongst themselves, if not always towards outsiders, martial skill, unwavering loyalty to one's chieftain and comrades, respect for oaths and spoken words, the strength to do what was right even when difficult, and a stoic self, mastery when confronted with danger or hardship. A man who embodied drengskaper was a drenger, a figure of high admiration and social esteem. As the great Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson later wrote, reflecting on these traditional values, brave and magnanimous men who are influential are called drengs. To be known as a drenger was one of the highest compliments a Viking could receive. To be accused of lacking drengskaper was a grave insult, often with serious social and even violent repercussions. This wasn't just an abstract ideal, it was a lived reality, a standard against which actions were judged and reputations were made or broken. The sagas are replete with characters whose lives revolve around the pursuit and maintenance of this honor, their narratives often driven by the consequences of honorable or dishonorable deeds. Closely intertwined with, and indeed a primary motivator for, the upholding of drengskaper was the burning desire for stirar, literally word fame, or renown, but more poetically, an undying reputation that would outlive one's mortal existence. In a world without widespread literacy for preserving personal histories, and in a pre-Christian cosmology where the afterlife for many might seem uncertain or less appealing than the Christian heaven, the surest path to a form of immortality was through the deeds one performed in life, deeds so remarkable that they would be remembered, recounted, and sung by poets, skalds for generations to come. Worldly possessions, kinfolk, even life itself, were perceived as transient, fleeting, but a glorious reputation, earned through valorous acts, noble conduct, and memorable achievements, particularly in battle or on daring voyages, possessed the power to transcend death. This profound belief is perhaps most famously and eloquently encapsulated in the Ech Vamals, Sayings of the High One, a collection of Old Norse poems offering wisdom and guidance attributed to the god Odin himself. Stanza 76 or 77 in some editions declares, Dir fa deja fragar, dir skjellafrit sama, in ori stier dir aldragi of amer sergi and getter, meaning cattle die, kinsmen die, the self dies the same, but the glory of reputation never dies for the one who is able to achieve a good one. This single stanza acts as a powerful distillation of a core Viking motivation. It wasn't just about winning battles or acquiring wealth, though these were certainly desirable. It was about forging a legacy, ensuring that one's name and deeds would echo through time, recited in the smoky halls of chieftains and whispered around campfires. This powerful cultural imperative relentlessly spurred warriors to undertake heroic actions, to seek out challenges, to face danger head-on, and to strive for glory in combat. The knowledge that their stories, if sufficiently grand, would be enshrined in the oral tradition, perhaps later recorded in the sagas, and thus remembered by posterity, was a potent driving force. They were, in a very real sense, living for the narrative that would be told about them after they were gone. B. The call of Valhalla, a warrior's paradise. While Orsti were offered a form of earthly immortality through remembered fame, Norse mythology also presented a more tangible and undeniably alluring vision of the afterlife for the warrior who fell bravely in battle. Valhalla, Valhalla, Hall of the Slain. This was not a universal paradise, it was an exclusive domain, the magnificent, gold-roofed hall of the chief god Odin in Asgard, reserved for those chosen warriors, the Einherjar lone fighters, or those who fight alone, implying unique distinction. According to mythological accounts, particularly those found in the Poetic Edda and Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, it was the Valkyries, formidable female figures, Odins, choosers of the slain, who rode forth over battlefields, selecting those warriors deemed worthy, those who had died with exceptional courage and martial prowess, to be escorted to Valhalla. Once there, the Einherjar would lead a life that was, in essence, an idealized continuation of their warrior existence. By day, they would engage in glorious combat, fighting and dying, only to be miraculously healed and resurrected by evening. By night, they would feast sumptuously on the inexhaustible meat of the boar esti huri muir, drink endless draughts of mid from the udders of the goat Hyren, and be served by the beautiful Valkyries. This daily cycle of heroic battle and joyous feasting was not an end in itself. It was, according to some interpretations, a form of training, a way for Odin to gather and prepare a vast army of elite warriors for the ultimate, cataclysmic battle of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, where they would fight alongside the Aesir, the Norse gods, against the forces of chaos, the giants and monsters like Fenrir the wolf and Jormungandr the Midgard serpent. The belief in Valhalla, however widespread or literally interpreted it may have been among the average Viking warrior, undoubtedly provided a powerful psychological incentive. It reframed the very concept of death in battle. Instead of being an ultimate end, a tragedy to be avoided at all costs, a heroic death on the battlefield became a potential gateway, a glorious transition to a revered and highly desirable afterlife. It actively encouraged warriors to fight with valor, to embrace danger, and to face death without flinching, for a glorious demise was the surest ticket to Odin's Hall. This belief system perfectly mirrored and reinforced the core Viking societal values of courage, honor, martial skill, and unwavering loyalty. Valhalla was not a place for the cowardly, the indecisive, or those who died a straw death, see of old age or sickness in their beds. It was the ultimate reward for a life lived, and ended in accordance with the warrior ideal. The psychological impact of such a belief system on a warrior facing the chaos and lethality of combat cannot be overstated. It transformed a potential moment of ultimate fear into one of potential ultimate glory. See Word and Aralag, the Viking conception of fate. Alongside the pursuit of fame and the promise of Valhalla, another profound belief shaped the Viking worldview, a strong, almost palpable, sense of fate, known in Old Norse as Ur-ir or Wuralagesies, cognate with the Old English weird. This was not necessarily a fatalistic resignation to a preordained, unchangeable script, but rather an understanding that the broad currents of life, the major turning points, and ultimately, the time and manner of one's death, were shaped by powerful, overarching forces personified by the Norns. These three female deities, Oriars, what once was, Ver-Andis, what is coming into being, and Skolds, what shall be, were said to dwell at the well of Arar beneath Yggdrasil, the world tree, weaving the threads of destiny for all beings, gods and mortals alike. Even Odin himself was subject to their decrees. Paradoxically, this belief in an unalterable destiny did not, for the Viking, lead to passivity or a reluctance to act. Quite the contrary, if the ultimate outcome, particularly the moment of one's death, was already determined, then there was little point in cautious timidity. Instead, it often fostered a courageous, even reckless, acceptance of one's allotted path. Since death was inevitable and its timing fixed by the Norns, the Viking warrior was often encouraged to be bold, to take risks, and to live life to the fullest, for there was, in a sense, nothing to lose by daring greatly. What mattered was not whether one died, but how one met one's fate. Honor was to be found in facing one's destiny, whatever it might be, with courage, dignity, and unwavering resolve, even if that destiny seemed to lead to certain doom. This heroic defiance in the face of an unyielding fate is a recurring theme in Norse mythology and sagas. The gods themselves, at the prophesied Ragnarok, know they are fated to perish in their final battle against the forces of chaos, yet they go forth to meet their doom with unflinching courage, fighting to the very end. This divine example provided a powerful model for mortal warriors. Thus, the concept of gu-rollag, far from paralyzing action, often served to liberate it, freeing the warrior from the anxiety of the unknown and empowering them to act decisively and heroically in the present moment, striving to make their allotted lifespan one worthy of Orstuverdi. The sting of ne, social stigma, insult, and conflict, while honor, fame, Valhalla, and a heroic acceptance of fate represented the aspirational heights of the Viking warrior ethos. There was also a powerful negative motivator, a profound social abyss that every self-respecting Norseman sought to avoid: the shame and social ostracism associated with NEA. NEA was a complex and highly charged concept encompassing slander, insult, scorn, and, most damningly, accusations of cowardice, unmanliness, particularly passive homosexuality, termed urge, or oath-breaking. To be subjected to NTA was to have one's honor, one's very social standing, grievously attacked. NEA could take many forms. It could be verbal insults, tongue NTE, often delivered publicly to maximize their shaming effect. It could be expressed through scathingly satirical or accusatory verses, mivie surd, which, in a society that highly valued poetic skill, could be incredibly potent weapons capable of killing. A man's reputation as effectively as a sword could kill his body, and it could even take physical, ritualistic forms, such as the erection of a nanzii stemungiri scorn pole, or spite, poled, often a pole topped with a horse's head and carved with runes, directed towards an enemy to bring them ill fortune and public contempt. The sagas provide numerous examples of the power of such insults. Egil Skallagri Misson, the famous warrior poet, was a master of wielding both sword and scathing verse. To be labeled a Neni Inger, a coward, an outlaw, an oath breaker, a man devoid of honor, was one of the worst fates that could befall a Viking. It carried severe social stigma and could have dire legal consequences, potentially leading to outlawry, making the individual a legitimate target for anyone to kill without penalty, or, at the very least, granting the insulted party the right to seek violent retribution, often through a formal duel like the Holmgang, to restore their tarnished honor. The extreme sensitivity to insults related to honor and masculinity meant that disputes could easily escalate into violence. This constant pressure to defend one's honor, to respond aggressively to perceived slights, ensured that martial prowess remained a continually tested and highly valued attribute within the free strata of Viking society. It kept warriors in a state of readiness and reinforced the importance of fighting skills not just for external conflict, but for navigating the often perilous social landscape at home. The interplay of these powerful motivators, the shining allure of Orstieirar and Valhalla, the stoic acceptance of gu-rollag, and the terrifying specter of NZE, created a potent psychological framework. This framework served to minimize the fear of death while maximizing the impetus for courage, risk-taking, and aggressive action in battle. It was a distinct cultural advantage, forging warriors who were often perceived by their enemies as fearless, relentless, and terrifyingly committed. The desire for undying fame was not merely an abstract notion, it was intrinsically linked to the very survival of one's legacy through the oral tradition of skaldic poetry and the later prose sagas. Heroic deeds in battle, daring voyages, and unwavering loyalty were the raw material for these narratives. Consequently, warriors were powerfully incentivized to act in ways that would be deemed saga-worthy, knowing that their orstirer, their very claim to a form of immortality, depended on their story being told and retold. This created a self-reinforcing cycle. The ethos spurred the action, and the action, when memorialized in story and song, further entrenched and propagated the warrior ethos to new generations. The heart of the Viking warrior, therefore, was not a simple vessel of aggression. It was a complex chamber, echoing with calls to honor, dreams of eternal renown, acceptance of an unyielding fate, and a profound dread of social shame. These were the intangible, yet immensely powerful, forces that animated the Viking spear and guided the Viking longship across the wide, dark seas. We have now peered into the Viking warrior's heart, understanding the potent ideologies that fueled their courage and ambition. But a formidable spirit, however willing, requires a society that actively cultivates and channels its martial potential. How, then, did Viking society mold its sons, and sometimes its daughters, into the formidable warriors who shook the foundations of Europe? And what pressures, both internal and environmental, conspired to make warfare and expansion such an integral part of their existence? Let us now explore the societal crucible and the environmental forge that shaped the Viking warrior. Part 5. Forging the Viking warrior. Social structures and environmental pressures. A Viking warrior was not simply born. He and occasionally she was meticulously, often arduously, made. The fearsome raider who stepped ashore from a longship, axe in hand, was the end product of a long and deeply ingrained societal process, a cultural conditioning that began in childhood and extended through every facet of life. Viking society, in many respects, was a militarized one, not necessarily in the sense of a standing professional army dominating all aspects of governance, though elements of this existed, but more profoundly in the pervasive infusion of martial values, skills, and expectations into the very fabric of daily existence. This was a culture where preparedness for conflict was not an aberration, but a fundamental necessity for survival, status, and success. A militarized society, from childhood games to warrior readiness. The journey towards becoming a Viking warrior often began in the cradle, or at least as soon as a child could walk and grasp. Martial values were not confined to formal training grounds. They were subtly and overtly woven into the upbringing of children, shaping their worldview and their physical capabilities from their earliest years. While children naturally engaged in play, much of that play in Viking Age Scandinavia had a distinctly practical and often martial undertone. They learned the essential duties and laborious tasks of farm life, building physical resilience and a pragmatic understanding of their environment. But alongside these agrarian skills, boys, in particular, were introduced to the tools and techniques of combat from a remarkably young age, typically by their fathers, uncles, or other male kinsmen. They would learn the rudiments of handling a spear, the heft and swing of an axe, the intricate dance of sword and shield. Archaeological finds of miniature, toy, like wooden swords, small axes, and even tiny shield bosses attest to this early familiarization with the implements of war. These were not merely passive amusements, they were crucial developmental tools, fostering hand-eye coordination, physical strength, an intuitive understanding of weapon dynamics, and perhaps most importantly, a cultural normalization of weaponry and its use. Even some sagas hint at strong-willed or exceptionally capable girls receiving some measure of weapons training, challenging the purely male-centric view of the warrior, though this was likely less common or formalized. Beyond direct weapon play, other childhood games and activities served to instill strategic thinking and physical preparedness. Board games like Afterlife, often called Viking chess, a complex game of strategy involving unequal forces where one side, the king and his defenders, attempts to escape to the board's edge while surrounded by a larger attacking force, may well have subtly conveyed lessons in tactics, foresight, and the importance of protecting a leader or a key objective. Such games were not just pastimes, they were intellectual training grounds. Furthermore, physical prowess was highly esteemed and actively cultivated through a variety of demanding sports and physical contests. Glima, the unique form of Scandinavian wrestling still practiced today, was a core component of this physical education. It was far more than a sport, it was a sophisticated martial art, encompassing a wide array of throws, locks, trips, and grappling techniques applicable in unarmed combat. Some Glima variants even incorporated mock weaponry or principles directly transferable to fighting with knives, axes, or swords. Running, swimming in the cold northern waters, stone throwing, archery contests, and feats of strength were all common pursuits, building stamina, agility, explosive power, and a general readiness for the rigors of combat and strenuous sea voyages. This constant engagement with physically demanding activities, often undertaken in harsh weather conditions, forged individuals who were tough, resilient, and intimately familiar with their own physical capabilities and limitations. As a Viking youth transitioned into adulthood, the expectation of martial competence became even more explicit. For a free man in Viking society, owning weapons was not just a right, it was often a social obligation, a visible marker of his status and his capacity to defend himself, his family, and his community. Weapons were frequently displayed with pride, not hidden away. The sagas are filled with instances where the quality and decoration of a man's weapons are commented upon, reflecting their importance as symbols of wealth, power, and personal identity. Therefore, formal and informal training with actual weapons, swordplay, axe drills, spear practice, shield work was a continuous part of life for many. This training would have focused not just on individual techniques, but also on fighting in coordination with others, understanding the dynamics of a shield wall, and responding to a leader's commands. Mock battles, competitive sparring, and perhaps even the more formalized duels of the holmgang, discussed earlier for its role in dispute resolution, but also undoubtedly a proving ground for skill, served to hone these abilities to a keen edge. The Viking warrior was, in many ways, the product of a society that viewed martial skill not as a specialized profession for a select few, but as a fundamental attribute of responsible, honorable manhood. Military organization. The herd and the lighting, elite cohorts, and popular levies. This pervasive societal militarization found its more formal expression in organized military structures that allowed Viking leaders to harness and project power effectively, both at home and abroad. While much Viking raiding may have been conducted by ad hoc war bands led by enterprising chieftains or sea kings, two key institutions stand out: the elite herd and the broader levy system known as the lighting. The herd's Old Norse her was the personal retinue, the sworn household guard, and the elite warrior band of a powerful Jarls Earl, King Konungerd, or significant chieftain. These were not conscripts or part-time warriors, they were, in essence, full-time, professional fighting men, living in close proximity to their leader, often within his great hall, supported by him, and bound to him by powerful oaths of loyalty and personal allegiance. The herd formed the very core, the sharp cutting edge, of their leader's military power and political authority. Recruitment into a herd was often a path to status, wealth, and renown for ambitious young men, particularly those from good families or who were kinsmen of the leader. However, the sagas also suggest that a herd could be a meritocratic environment to some extent, attracting skilled warriors from diverse backgrounds, sometimes even including former enemies or escaped thralls who had proven their worth and loyalty. Prospective herdmen, Hermard, would swear solemn oaths of fealty to their lord, pledging to defend him to the death, and in return, the lord would provide them with sustenance, shelter, weaponry, a share of plunder, and, crucially, his protection and patronage. This created an intensely personal bond, a brotherhood, in arms, often reinforced by communal feasting, drinking rituals, and the shared experiences of training and combat. Some scholars have suggested possible links between herd organizations and dedications to warrior cults, perhaps centered around the god Odin, further strengthening their cohesion and martial spirit. Members of the herd were typically the best equipped warriors, often possessing mail shirts, iron helmets, fine swords, and well-made shields, frequently provided or subsidized by their lord. Their days would have been filled with rigorous training, practicing individual combat skills, formation fighting such as the shield wall or offensive wedges, siegecrafts if applicable, and seamanship. In peacetime, the herd served as their lord's personal bodyguards, his trusted advisors, members of his council, and enforcers of his will, perhaps involved in tax collection, law enforcement within his territory, and diplomatic missions. But it was in wartime that their true value was most apparent. They acted as the shock troops, the vanguard that would break enemy formations, the disciplined core around which less experienced warriors could rally, and the unwavering personal guard of their leader, often fighting to the last man to protect him. Within the herd, there might be further specializations and ranks, such as standard bearers SM Merkismar or marshals Stalarid, who held specific responsibilities. The herd system, with its emphasis on personal loyalty, professional skill, and elite status, provided Viking leaders with a highly effective, cohesive, and reliable fighting force. While the herd represented the professional military elite, the Lydang, Old Norse Ly-Angrd, was a much broader system of naval conscription, or levy, designed to raise large fleets and manpower for coastal defense, for ambitious overseas expeditions, whether for raiding, conquest, or large-scale trade, and for major wars. This system, which varied in its specifics across different regions of Scandinavia and evolved over time, essentially divided coastal and sometimes inland territories into districts, often called skiprei ship, reed, or ship district. Each such district was then responsible for building, maintaining, manning, and provisioning a warship of a certain size, along with providing a crew of warriors for a set period, typically 2 to 3 months of service per year. All free farmers, bend, and landowners within a district were generally obligated to contribute to the Lydang, either through personal service or by providing resources and substitutes. Failure to fulfill one's Lydang obligations could result in severe penalties. The initial equipment expected of a Lydang warrior was often basic an axe, or perhaps a sword if they could afford one, a spear, and a shield. However, as the Viking Age progressed, and as some regions became more centralized and wealthy, the equipment requirements for the Lydang became more stringent, with wealthier freemen expected to provide themselves with helmets, mail shirts, and a greater array of weaponry. Command of a Lydang ship typically fell to a local notable or experienced seaman, the Styramar, steersman, or captain, who was responsible for his vessel and crew. Larger Lydang fleets would be commanded by Jarls kings, or, in later Christianized Scandinavia, sometimes even bishops or powerful nobles who held significant land and influence. Leadership within the Lydang, as in other aspects of Viking military life, was often based on proven martial competence, personal charisma, and the ability to inspire and command men. The Lydang system, therefore, provided a mechanism for mobilizing significant portions of the free male population for military purposes, transforming the collective maritime strength of Scandinavian coastal communities into a potent instrument of regional power, and eventually, a force capable of projecting itself far across the seas. It was, in essence, a form of people's navy, crucial for both defending their own shores and for launching the large-scale expeditions that characterized the peak of the Viking Age. See Scandinavian realities. Environmental and demographic pressures, the push from home, while a militarized society and organized military structures provided the means for Viking expansion. The motives were often rooted in the harsh realities and evolving dynamics of their Scandinavian homelands. It is a compelling argument that some of the most powerful forces propelling the Vikings outwards were the push factors emanating from their own environment and demographic situation. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests a significant population increase in Scandinavia during the centuries leading up to and encompassing the early Viking Age, roughly the 8th and 9th centuries AD. This demographic boom has been attributed to several potential factors acting in concert. A period of relatively favorable climatic conditions, known as the medieval warm period, which may have led to longer growing seasons and improved agricultural yields, the adoption of more intensive farming techniques and perhaps new crop strains, and possibly social strategies that encouraged larger families. This growing population, however, soon began to press against the finite resources of the Scandinavian landscape. Much of Scandinavia, particularly Norway with its dramatic fjords and mountainous interior, and large parts of Sweden, offered limited arable land suitable for agriculture. The fertile areas were often confined to coastal strips, river valleys, and scattered pockets inland. As the population grew, the pressure on this finite agricultural resource intensified. Furthermore, centuries of deforestation for farming, fuel, and, crucially, shipbuilding, the construction of longships and knarrs consumed vast quantities of timber, would have progressively depleted forest resources in many areas. Intensive farming practices, without modern understanding of soil conservation, may also have led to soil exhaustion and declining productivity in some established agricultural regions. Coastal areas, often the most productive and populous, likely became increasingly overcrowded, creating internal competition and pushing younger or less established individuals and families to seek new opportunities elsewhere. These environmental and demographic pressures were further compounded by evolving social and political factors within Scandinavia itself. Changes in land tenure systems, such as the increasing prevalence of primogenitures, where the eldest son inherited the bulk of the family estate, meant that younger sons often faced limited prospects at home. They might receive a smaller share of land, or no land at all, forcing them to seek their fortunes through other means: trade, service to a chieftain, or, most enticingly for some, participation in Viking expeditions abroad, which offered the promise of plunder, land, and status. The gradual rise of more powerful regional chieftains and, eventually, kings, often accompanied by increased taxation and greater demands for tribute or service, may also have created a class of disaffected or displaced individuals. Some may have found the imposition of a stronger central authority onerous, preferring the freedom and potential for self-enrichment offered by a life Viking. Therefore, the allure of overseas ventures was not just about greed or adventure. For many, it was a pragmatic response to diminishing opportunities and increasing socio-economic pressures at home. Expansion, in its various forms, raiding for portable wealth, trading for essential goods and luxuries, establishing new settlements in uninhabited or sparsely populated lands, or even conquering and ruling foreign territories, thus emerged as a viable, and often highly attractive, solution to this growing imbalance between population and domestic resources. It offered access to new agricultural land, as seen in the settlement of Iceland and Greenland, an influx of wealth in the form of silver, gold, and other valuable commodities, such as the Danegeld extorted from England and Francia, or the profits from the slave trade, and new, lucrative commercial opportunities that could enrich individuals and their communities. The Viking Age, viewed through this lens, was not simply an outburst of inexplicable aggression. It was, in significant part, a dynamic response to a complex set of internal pressures, a resourceful and often ruthless effort by a burgeoning population to overcome the limitations of their native environment and to secure their prosperity and future in a wider, more challenging world. The restless energy forged in the crucible of Scandinavian social and environmental realities found its most dramatic outlet on the seas and shores of distant lands. This societal framework, which instilled martial values from youth and provided organized military structures, combined with the undeniable push of environmental and demographic pressures, created a potent cocktail. It produced a population not only skilled in warfare and seamanship, but also highly motivated to venture forth. The herd provided the professional spearhead, the lading the broader manpower, and the individual Viking, conditioned by his upbringing and often driven by necessity or ambition, was the willing agent of this expansion. The stage was set, the actors prepared, and the world beyond their shores offered both peril and immense promise. Part 6. The Viking Economy. A glimpse into trade and plunder. The sagas sing of heroes laden with silver from plundered monasteries and of longships returning heavy with the spoils of war. This image of the Viking as a relentless, opportunistic plunderer is deeply ingrained in our historical consciousness, and for good reason. But to view their economic activities solely through the lens of violent acquisition would be to fundamentally misunderstand the sophistication, the reach, and the transformative impact of the Viking economic system. For the Vikings were not only fearsome raiders, they were also astute merchants, intrepid explorers of commercial frontiers, and pivotal connectors of disparate worlds. Their economic dynamism was built upon two powerful, often symbiotic, pillars: the swift gains of plunder and the sustained profits of far-flung trade. A. The twin engines. Plunder and commerce parallel and intertwined motivations. The economic motivations behind Viking raids were brutally straightforward and undeniably effective, at least in the short term. The primary objective was the rapid acquisition of portable wealth. This encompassed a wide array of valuable, easily transportable goods, precious metals, particularly silver and gold, whether in the form of coins, Frankish deniers, Anglo-Saxon pennies, Byzantine solidi, and later, a flood of Islamic dirhams, bullion-s ingots, arm rings, neck rings, and hacked silver or hack silver, used as a form of currency by weight, finely crafted jewelry, and ornate ecclesiastical treasures such as reliquaries, chalices, and illuminated manuscripts, often stripped of their jeweled covers. Beyond precious metals, human beings, slaves, ride lard, constituted another horrifically lucrative commodity, captured in raids on coastal settlements across the British Isles, Francia, and especially the Slavic lands of Eastern Europe. Livestock, fine textiles, weapons, tools, and other valuable goods were also seized. Monasteries, often located in isolated coastal or riverine locations, with their accumulated wealth in precious objects and their generally poor defenses, were prime and frequent targets, particularly in the early phases of the Viking Age. Wealthy trading towns and undefended rural settlements also suffered grievously. Furthermore, the Vikings perfected a form of systematic extortion, most famously exemplified by the Danegeld. This was essentially protection money, vast sums of silver paid by terrified English, Frankish, and other rulers to Viking armies to persuade them to leave their lands or to refrain from attacking. While intended as a defensive measure, these payments, often running into tens of thousands of pounds of silver, ironically served only to demonstrate the profitability of Viking aggression and likely funded even larger and more formidable expeditions in the future. Raiding, therefore, was not just random violence. It was, for many, a calculated economic enterprise, a high-risk, high-reward venture aimed at wealth extraction. Yet, running parallel to, and often deeply interwoven with, these activities of plunder and extortion was an equally significant, and ultimately perhaps more transformative, engagement in long-distance trade. The Vikings were not simply takers, they were also makers and movers of goods. They established, expanded, and, for a considerable period, largely controlled vast and intricate trading networks that connected the disparate worlds of Northern Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and beyond. These routes were arteries of commerce, cultural exchange, and information flow. Their trading tentacles stretched westwards across the North Sea to the British Isles, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Francia. They dominated the Baltic Sea, connecting Scandinavia with the Slavic and Baltic peoples of its southern and eastern shores. Perhaps most impressively, they pioneered and controlled the great riverine routes of Eastern Europe, the Dnieper, leading south to the Black Sea, and the opulent markets of the Byzantine Empire, their Miklagard, and the Volga, which flowed eastwards, providing access to the Caspian Sea, and thence to the rich civilizations of the Islamic caliphates in Persia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. The discovery of vast quantities of Arabic silver dirhams in Scandinavian hoards, far exceeding any locally mined silver, is irrefutable testament to the scale and importance of this Eastern trade. Furthermore, their trade extended across the perilous North Atlantic to their own settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and for a time, even the distant shores of Vinland in North America, creating a truly transatlantic commercial sphere. This was not haphazard barter, it was organized, often large-scale, and remarkably resilient commerce. Sa'anani, using emphatic language to underscore the sophistication of Viking trading. This extensive commercial activity was facilitated and centered upon a series of strategically located trading emporia, or proto-urban centers, which flourished during the Viking Age. Within Scandinavia itself, key hubs included Hidebe's Haithabu in present-day northern Germany, then Danish territory, a vital nexus controlling trade between the Baltic and the North Sea via a short overland portage. Birka in Sweden, on Lake Mälaren, was a major eastern-facing emporium, crucial for the Baltic and Russian river trades. Koppang in Norway served as a significant center for North Sea and North Atlantic trade. Ribe in Denmark was another important early trading town. Beyond Scandinavia, Viking influence and settlement led to the establishment or significant development of other crucial trading centers. Jorvik to York in England became a major Viking-controlled commercial and manufacturing hub. In Ireland, towns like Dublin, Dyflin, Waterford v Rafjar, Wexford v Sfjar, Cork, and Limerick's Limericker were founded or significantly expanded by the Vikings, initially perhaps as fortified bases for raiding longforts, but rapidly evolving into thriving centers of international trade, particularly in slaves and Hiberno, Norse silverwork. In Eastern Europe, Norse traders, often known as Russ or Varangians, played a pivotal role in the foundation and early development of centers like Novgorod's Holmgarart and Kiev's Kadav-Nugarar, which became crucial nodes on the river routes to Byzantium and the East. These emporia were cosmopolitan melting pots, bustling with merchants, craftsmen, sailors, and adventurers from diverse cultures, facilitating the exchange of not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, and artistic styles. B. The wares of a world connected. Goods in the Viking trade. The range of goods that flowed along these Viking-dominated trade routes was remarkably diverse, reflecting the varied resources and demands of the interconnected regions. From their Scandinavian homelands and the territories under their control or influence, the Vikings exported a wealth of northern products, many of which were highly prized in the more southerly and easterly civilizations. Furs were a paramount export. The pelts of beaver, sable, marten, fox, otter, and bear from the vast forests of Scandinavia and Russia were in high demand for luxury garments in Byzantium and the Islamic world. Walrus ivory, from the tusks of these Arctic marine mammals, was a valuable substitute for elephant ivory, used for carving luxury items, gaming pieces, and ornate crucifixes. Amber, the fossilized tree resin found along the Baltic coasts, was another highly sought-after commodity used for jewelry and amulets. Other exports included honey and beeswax, essential for candlemaking and sealing, timbers, especially for shipbuilding in regions where it was scarce, iron both raw and worked, steatite soapstone, easily carved into bowls, lamps, and cooking pots. Whetstone sharpening stones, particularly from specific Norwegian quarries, were renowned for their quality and widely traded, and high-quality woolen textiles, including the robust Vamel cloth used for everyday clothing and, crucially, for making the sails of their longships. Even Viking-made weapons, particularly swords and axe, heads of good quality, found their way into export markets. However, perhaps one of the most significant, and certainly the most morally troubling from a modern perspective, exports from the Viking world was human beings, slaves, or railar. Slavery was a widespread institution in the Viking Age, and the Vikings were deeply involved in both the capture and trade of slaves. Thralls were acquired through raids, particularly in the British Isles and the Slavic lands of Eastern Europe. The very word, slave, in many European languages derives from Slav, reflecting the scale of this traffic. These unfortunate captives were then transported and sold in markets across the Viking world, and most lucratively, to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates, where there was a constant demand for domestic servants, laborers, concubines, and eunuchs. Dublin, under Viking control, became one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. The profits from this human trafficking were immense, often paid in the coveted silver that flowed back into Scandinavia, fueling further expeditions and enriching the slave trading elite. This trade in human lives represents a dark, yet undeniable, cornerstone of the Viking economy. In return for these exports, a wide variety of imports flowed back into Scandinavia and Viking-controlled territories, enriching their material culture and connecting them to the luxuries and technologies of more distant lands. Silver was arguably the most important import, arriving in vast quantities, primarily in the form of Arabic dirham coins from the Islamic world, often melted down or used as hack silver, but also as Frankish and Anglo-Saxon coinage, bullion, and finished silver objects. This influx of silver transformed the Scandinavian economy, facilitating trade, enabling the payment of tribute and fines, and serving as a store of wealth and a medium of display. Silks from Byzantium and the Far East, via Islamic intermediaries, were highly prized luxury textiles used for fine clothing and adornment by the elite. Spices from the Orient added flavor and exoticism to their diet and perhaps had medicinal uses. Wine, primarily from Francia and the Rhineland, was a prestigious import consumed at feasts by chieftains and wealthy warriors. Glassware, including drinking vessels, beakers, cups, and raw glass cullet for making beads and other ornaments, was imported from the Rhineland, and the Middle East Viking craftsmen became skilled at producing their own colorful glass beads, which were themselves widely traded. Fine pottery, particularly from the Rhineland, Ezers, such as Badorf and Pingsdorf ware, supplemented local ceramic traditions. As previously mentioned, even high-quality weapons, such as Frankish swords, as including the famed Ulfbritseps, were sometimes imported, despite official embargoes, highlighting the Vikings' desire for the best available military technology. Ornate jewelry, fine cloths from Western Europe, and other exotic goods further testified to the reach and sophistication of their trading connections. C. the symbiotic dance, how plunder and trade reinforced each other. It is crucial to understand that for the Vikings, raiding and trading were not always mutually exclusive or sequential activities. Rather, they often existed in a complex, symbiotic relationship, each feeding into and reinforcing the other. This dynamic interplay was a key element of their economic success and their sustained capacity for expansion. The plunder acquired from successful raids, particularly silver, gold, and slaves, provided an immediate injection of capital. This capital could then be used to fund further trading expeditions, to purchase ships and equipment, to provision crews, or to acquire goods for resale in distant markets. Slaves captured in a raid in Ireland, for example, could be sold in Hedabai or transported further east to be traded for Arabic silver, which could then be used to buy Frankish weapons or Byzantine silks. Thus, raiding often generated the initial seed capital and the very commodities that fueled their commercial enterprises. Conversely, the knowledge gained from trading voyages, familiarity with coastlines, river systems, the location of wealthy towns and monasteries, and the political and military strengths or weaknesses of different regions, could identify lucrative targets for future raids. A merchant who had peacefully traded in a Frankish port might return with valuable intelligence that could inform a subsequent, less peaceful, visit by a Viking war band. The lines between trader, explorer, and raider were often blurred, and an individual might adopt different roles at different times, or even simultaneously. The very establishment of Viking settlements in foreign lands often followed this pattern. Fortified bases, or long forts, initially established to overwinter raiding parties or to serve as secure depots for plunders, as seen in Ireland and England, could gradually evolve into more permanent settlements. As these settlements grew, they often transformed into thriving commercial centers, attracting merchants and craftsmen, and becoming integrated nodes in the wider Viking trading network. Dublin is a prime example of a settlement that began as a Viking raiding base and became a major international trading port. Furthermore, the control of key trade routes itself became a strategic objective, sometimes necessitating military force to establish or maintain. Viking war bands might be employed to protect their own merchant convoys from rivals, or to forcibly open up new markets. The wealth generated from controlling choke points on important trade routes, or from taxing the commerce that passed through Viking-dominated emporia, could be substantial. Finally, the desire for luxury goods acquired through trade, the silks, spices, wine, and fine metalwork, undoubtedly fueled the ambition to acquire more wealth, which could be obtained either through further, more sophisticated trade, or through the quicker, if riskier, path of plunder. This created a self-perpetuating cycle. The taste for foreign luxuries stimulated economic activity, whether peaceful or violent, which in turn brought more wealth and contact with the outside world, further stimulating demand. The Viking economy, therefore, was not a simple, one-dimensional system. It was a remarkably adaptive and opportunistic blend of coercion and commerce. The wealth extracted through raiding often provided the impetus and the means for trade, while the networks and knowledge established through trade could, in turn, facilitate more effective raiding. It was this potent, flexible, and often ruthless economic engine that provided the essential material resources, the ships, the weapons, the manpower, the provisions, and the allure of riches necessary to sustain and expand Viking military activities across several centuries. Their economic adaptability, their willingness to switch between the roles of raider and trader as circumstances dictated, was a critical and often underestimated component of their enduring military strength and their profound, transformative impact on the medieval world. Part 7. Conclusion. The enduring enigma of Viking military power. A synergy of strengths. Recapping the interconnected elements. Our voyage through the Viking Age has revealed not a single, simple source of their power, but rather a complex and dynamic synergy of interconnected factors. It was this potent combination, this intricate interplay of capabilities and motivations, that allowed a people from the northern periphery to cast such a long and formidable shadow across the known world for nearly 3 centuries. Let us briefly revisit these pillars of Viking might, understanding how they reinforced and amplified one another. First, their unparalleled naval technology, epitomized by the revolutionary longship, granted them unprecedented strategic mobility, the ability to strike with surprise across vast distances, and access to inland territories previously secure from seaborne threats. But a superior vessel requires skilled hands and daring hearts to guide it. Second, their effective and often technologically advanced weaponry and armor, from the ubiquitous and versatile axe and spear to the elite status and cutting power of the Ulfbert sword and the robust protection of mail and shield, gave them a distinct advantage in combat. The evidence of their access to high-quality materials, sometimes through astonishingly long-distance connections, speaks to their resourcefulness. Yet, even the finest weapons are only as effective as the tactics employed and the discipline of those who wield them. Third, their disciplined battlefield tactics, most notably the formidable Skaldborg shield wall, combined with the terrifying psychological impact of their warrior fury, including phenomena like the Berserker Rage and their calculated use of terror, made them a daunting force in pitched battles and instilled fear far beyond their actual numbers. However, such tactics and ferocity needed to be sustained by a deep wellspring of motivation. Fourth, a powerful and compelling warrior ethos, driven by the pursuit of honor a drengskaper, the burning desire for undying fame Ori Sti Rod, the alluring promise of Valhalla for those slain heroically, and a stoic, courageous acceptance of fate Karalog provided an immense psychological impetus, minimizing the fear of death and maximizing commitment in battle. A visual cue stylized Valhalla or Ekavamalquodi. This ideology, though did not spring from a vacuum, it was nurtured and reinforced by the very fabric of their society. Fifth, a thoroughly militarized society that began training warriors from childhood, instilling martial values as a norm, and possessed organized military structures like the elite herd and the broader Lading levy, ensured a ready and capable supply of manpower conditioned for warfare. And sixth, powerful economic and demographic drivers, the push of resource scarcity and population pressure in their Scandinavian homelands, combined with the pull of portable wealth from plunder and the lucrative opportunities of long-distance trade, provided both the initial impetus and the sustained material resources for their centuries of military endeavors. Therefore, the ultimate explanation for the enduring military power of the Vikings lies not in any single one of these elements, however impressive in isolation. It was their masterful, synergistic combination, their advanced technological tools, ships and weapons, wielded by warriors profoundly conditioned by a unique ideology and robust social structures, all of this vast martial enterprise being continuously fueled and directed by pressing economic needs and enticing opportunities. They were, in essence, a perfect storm of maritime skill, martial prowess, societal cohesion, ideological conviction, and economic opportunism. B. The legacy of the Viking warrior, reshaping worlds. The Viking Age, as a distinct period of aggressive Norse expansion, eventually drew to a close. The precise reasons are complex and multifaceted. The increasing strength and organization of European kingdoms, making them harder targets, the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia itself, which subtly altered worldviews and perhaps tempered the more aggressive aspects of the warrior ethos, the absorption and assimilation of Viking settlers into local populations across Europe, and shifts in trade routes and economic patterns. But the passing of their age of dominance did not mean the erasure of their impact. Far from it, the legacy of the Viking warrior is profound, multifaceted, and continues to resonate in the political, cultural, and even genetic makeup of Europe and beyond. Their raids and conquests directly contributed to significant political transformations. The establishment of the Duchy of Normandy in France by Viking settlers, the Normans, or Northmen, created a powerful new political entity that would, in turn, conquer England in 1066, fundamentally reshaping English society, language, and governance. In Eastern Europe, Norse warriors and traders, known as the Rus or Varangians, played a crucial role in the formation of the first East Slavic states, most notably Kievan Rus, the precursor to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Their influence extended to the British Isles, with periods of Danish rule in England, as the Danelaw, the establishment of Norse kingdoms in Ireland and Scotland, and the profound impact on the development of towns and trade in these regions. They were not just destroyers, they were often state builders, catalysts for political change, and sometimes surprisingly effective administrators of the territories they came to control. Beyond grand political shifts, their legacy is evident in language, hundreds of Old Norse words integrated into English, such as aski, nef, berserk, skull, lot, in place names across northern Europe, in archaeological discoveries that continue to reveal the richness of their material culture, and in the sagas and Eddic poetry, which, though recorded centuries later, preserve a priceless window into their myths, legends, values, and worldview. Their shipbuilding technology influenced maritime design for centuries, and their exploratory voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland represent remarkable feats of navigation and courage, pushing the boundaries of the known European world. The Viking warrior also underwent a significant transformation over time, from the opportunistic raider of the early period to the settler, the merchant prince, the mercenary soldier, like those in the Varangian Guard, and even the Christian king leading armies under new banners. This adaptability, this capacity to evolve from fearsome outsider to integrated, and often leading, member of new societies, is perhaps one of their most remarkable, though often overlooked, characteristics. Their initial ferocity paved the way for more lasting forms of influence. The Viking story is not just one of conquest, but also of assimilation, acculturation, and contribution. See concluding reflections. The unfading mark of the Northmen. In summary, the military power of the Vikings was not a monolithic or static phenomenon. It was the dynamic product of a complex interplay of technological superiority, tactical flexibility, a potent warrior ideology deeply embedded within their social structures, and the relentless drive of economic necessity and opportunity. They were a unique and formidable force in their time, leaving an indelible mark on every land their longships touched. The enigma of Viking power, then, is perhaps less about a single undiscovered secret and more about appreciating the intricate, often brutal, elegance of how these diverse elements coalesced and functioned in concert. They were masters of their maritime environment, innovators in the tools of war, and possessed a psychological resilience and societal cohesion that made them incredibly effective. Their story is a powerful reminder of how geography, technology, culture, belief, and socio-economic pressures can converge to shape the destiny of a people and, through them, the course of history. And so, as the mists of time continue to swirl around the sagas and burial mounds of the North, the figure of the Viking warrior, part raider, part trader, part explorer, part settler, endures in our collective imagination, not merely as a caricature of horned helmets and mindless savagery, but as a testament to the astonishing capacity of human beings to adapt, to innovate, to endure, and to project their will across vast and challenging landscapes. The echoes of their axes and oars, their songs and their sagas, still resonate, a powerful reminder of a time when the fury of the Northmen reshaped the world.